Mr. Alvaro Rodriguez, United Nations Resident Coordinator in Turkey, retires from the United Nations after an impressive career that spans over 30 years in several countries. Mr. Rodriguez gave an interview to the United Nations Information Center in Ankara and answered questions on his career, his work in Turkey, and sustainable development goals.
After serving as an international civil servant for over 30 years, you're retiring at the end of August. You had an amazing career serving around the world for the United Nations values and priorities. Why did you decide to be an international civil servant?
Well, I guess there are a number of reasons. First, I had actually migrated from my native country, Chile, to Canada, and I was very interested in processes of social change, having seen the major contrast between Chile and Canada in the early 1980s. But I realized that I was interested in looking at it from a more global perspective, not just from a national perspective. So in a sense, it seemed like a natural course of action to try and get involved with some form of international organization. And then why the UN as opposed to maybe another type of international organization or international company? I think it relates to this interest that I mentioned in terms of social change. What makes countries prosperous and what holds them back? And one of the amazing things, of course, in any career in the UN really, is that you're always studying how countries are progressing according to certain metrics. Nowadays, it's the Sustainable Development Goals. Before, we had the Millennium Development Goals. When I joined, we used to have the periodic conferences on different topics, whether it was women or population. So I've always felt that one can contribute to human welfare in a way that cannot be done outside the UN. And when I joined, of course, it was exciting times. It was the end of the Soviet Union. It was the collapse of the Berlin Wall. There was this sense of euphoria that world peace and progress and development would break out and it would be a better future for all. It hasn't really happened that way. But at least in 1990, 1991, when I joined, we certainly felt that that could potentially be the case. And of course, great progress has been made, but maybe not as much as we would have hoped.
So what was the best part of your job?
Well, I think there are many good parts. Certainly the travel to visit different countries around the world to understand different cultures. But I think many colleagues that retire ask this question, and I think they generally say that it's the people. You actually realize that despite the incredible differences that sometimes superficially we may have, that deep inside we're really all the same, and we are one human family. And I've been fortunate to work in almost every continent, and what is clear is that really we are one big human family, and to be able to interact with the colleagues, with national governments, members of civil society, people in communities, you realize that what brings us together is actually much stronger than what pulls us apart. But for some reason, a lot of it having to do with politics, that unfortunately is not the case. But the memories of the people that I have met are the ones that will probably stay the longest in my mind and in my heart.
What will be your advice to young professionals who want to join the United Nations workforce?
It's difficult, but I would say, despite the difficulties of the life in the UN, the movements, the challenges, the fact that we increasingly work in more conflict-prone countries, that makes it difficult for families and potentially dangerous, of course, I think is to have faith. I think that progress is very slow. When I was young, I always felt that one could speed up the processes of social change. That is probably not the case. But I think that if you have faith and you know that you're running a marathon and not a sprint of 100 meters, you will be able to maintain the energy and the dedication to actually do it decade after decade. And it's that experience that you accumulate over the decades that in fact makes you a better international civil servant for the United Nations.
During your term in Turkey, in addition to COVID-19 pandemic, earthquakes hit 11 southern provinces. How did the United Nations perform during those crises?
Well, when you look at the number of deaths, over 50,000, over 100,000 wounded, 300,000 buildings destroyed, and the whole economic and social infrastructure of 11 provinces set back generations, decades, I would say no performance is the best performance. I think you do the best based on the circumstances. And I do believe that starting from the early days of search and rescue, moving on to the humanitarian phase, and now managing the transition from humanitarian to recovery and regular development, I think we played a very important role. A role that probably will always be, in a sense, maybe not highlighted enough because of the terrible devastation and the loss of life and the terrible suffering. But I think we did save lives during search and rescue. I think we helped promote social services and support the welfare of the victims during our humanitarian phase. And I believe we will do well in restoring the development prospects of the affected population.
Messages to the Turkish people, especially on the Sustainable Development Goals and how they can contribute to achieve them?
Well, the Sustainable Development Goals are really a mantra for us in the UN. They are the vision that has guided our work from 2016 to 2030. But now we are at the halfway mark, and sadly, we are off target. In fact, for a majority of the targets and indicators, we're not doing so well. And we know why. We've had global conflicts, we've had heat waves, we've had the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had the global inflation reaching levels that we haven't seen in a couple of decades. So we confronted many challenges, but I think that Turkey is a very important country globally, as a founding member of the UN, as an important country in this specific region, being a bridge between Asia and Europe and Africa, the Middle East as well. It can play a very important role in acting as a model for countries on the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I would hope is that despite the fact that we are off track, in the 7 or 8 years that remain, that Turkey will be a good model for development for other countries, because other countries do pay attention to the development pathway that Turkey has followed.
Thank you very much for this lovely interview. Do you have any other additional messages?
No, well, just to thank you for the opportunity and to wish you all success as you all continue your own careers in the UN.